Peter Parker suffers a lot, like probably more than he should. But that's always been a part of his character, a part of what makes him likable and relatable, right? Well, I'm actually here to challenge this idea. Does Spider-Man actually have to suffer as much as he does? But before we jump into that, I want to urge you guys to subscribe to this channel because we post Spider-Man content every single week. If you love the movies, the games, the shows, the comics, pretty much anything to do with Spider-Man, this channel's for you. Make sure to subscribe. We're also really close to 30,000 subscribers, and I would love if we could reach that goal by the summer. That would be absolutely awesome. With that said, let's get straight into this. So Peter Parker is always destined to suffer. This isn't just something that is drilled into his character, but something that has had a meta-analysis built into it ever since. Peter Parker, in so many stories, understands that it is his destiny to suffer no matter what. This wasn't built into the script, but I actually just realized that one story that Jonathan Hickman wrote, who is the current writer of Ultimate Spider-Man, in Amazing Fantasy issue 1000, which essentially was a collection of Spider-Man stories written by a bunch of different writers celebrating the anniversary of Amazing Fantasy. Essentially, he wrote a story about Spider-Man who goes into the multiverse and basically questions why his life is so miserable and why he suffers all the time. And essentially, the Spider-Men in the multiverse basically say to him, we're destined to suffer all the time. We're Spider-Man, and that's what being Spider-Man is about. Your life is always set to be miserable. But that isn't the point of being Spider-Man. The point is that you get back up and that you carry on fighting. Now, this is really interesting. Keep this in mind because this is a point we're going to bring up later. Another recent example of this in the mainstream media is actually Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and this is probably the main example of this as well. Despite how you may feel about canon events and the destiny of Spider-Man, it did tell us one thing about the character. In every universe, no matter what, Spider-Man or Spider-Woman is destined to experience tragedy. It's an ideology that's built into the character and its roots and its history that it's almost considered blasphemy if you were to take it away from him. Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, Aunt May, I could go on. There are so many characters that have been killed or Peter has lost that make him suffer. But after all the hardships and suffering, why does Peter Parker still continue to fail despite the fact that he already has a million times over? A Reddit user that goes by the name of the Grumpiest Panda made a very interesting comment on this subject, saying, Peter will suffer because it's supposed to make him endearing, and the fact that Spider-Man can pick himself back up after all he's been through shows how strong he really is. Now, this is something that, like I mentioned earlier, Jonathan Hickman actually brought up in his story in Amazing Fantasy 1000. However, I'm here to challenge that idea and that ideology. Does this ideology and this idea really make for a more endearing character? The way I view it is that the more you batter someone down, the less meaning is given to every time they get back up. If a character has never lost before, but then are matched by something as powerful, if not more powerful than them, and then they lose, the willpower to watch that character get back up and go again is energizing. It's what makes a character like Spider-Man so successful. I think Spider-Man's first real example of this trope came in the form of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 31 to 33 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, which is also known as the famous If It Be My Destiny storyline. In this story, Peter is faced with a challenge like no other. At this point, he'd already lost Uncle Ben, and Aunt May was faced with a life-threatening illness, and Peter had to rescue a chemical which could save her life. However, what he needed to save her was in the hands of the Master Planner, who would later go on to be revealed to be Doc Ock. And when everything seemed lost, and when Peter seemed defeated, he broke out of the rubble to save the day and to save his aunt. Peter was faced with adversity and came out on top, saving the day, and arguably this is one of the most powerful Spider-Man moments in the comics history. This is largely considered to be one of the prime examples of what makes a character like Spider-Man work. When moments like these are rehashed, reiterated time and time and time again, it just waters down the whole idea of Peter being beaten down and getting back up. If It Be My Destiny gave so much depth to Peter as a character and a person, but since then this kind of storytelling trope is constantly used on Spider-Man. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be, like this is something that's heavily tied to the character. However, when you do it so much, it kind of reduces its meaning. A recent example is actually in the Zeb Wells run of Spider-Man comics. During a battle with the Vulture, Peter is actually begging for mercy and the help of Norman Osborn. Norman ends up saving Peter and rescuing him from inevitable death, which could be a dramatic and tense moment. Like, this moment could actually be really good and could be a great storytelling moment for the character. However, we've seen this like a million times in Spider-Man comics before. It didn't really mean anything. And I guess this brings us on to the wider picture. Does Peter Parker have to suffer as much as he does? Does the fact that he suffers so much take away from the moments of of grief, hardship, and mental struggle that we should be caring about. Going back to the Reddit user, he then later added another comment to say this: I feel like in most recent years, Marvel is just unnecessarily cruel to Spider-Man in general. Like, being down on your luck is one thing, and then there's just the universe despising you. I feel like Peter Parker's life falls into the latter with most recent Spider-Man comics. And I feel like this comment couldn't be closer to the truth. However, it doesn't just go for Spider-Man comics. No, Spider-Man games, Spider-Man movies, they all have this same ideology and idea that Spider-Man just has to fail no matter what. Spider-Man is placed into this category of characters that have to suffer because that's who they are, that is what they are, when that's just not true. This brings us on to the idea of relatability. Spider-Man is a character that is touted to be one of the most relatable superheroes on the planet, and that's one of the reasons why people fell in love with him. He's broke, he's got girl troubles, and, you know, he's just a normal guy, right? He could be me, he could be you, he could be anyone. But does anyone actually suffer as much as Spider-Man? Maybe that's a silly question, because maybe someone does. Maybe someone really is as unfortunate as Peter Parker, but realistically, most of us have wins. Like, it's normal to be happy, it's normal to have something good happen in your life, like, that's not completely out the question. But the amount of things that have happened and gone wrong in Peter's life, surely it's not relatable anymore. Even people who lead lives with pretty unlucky circumstances win every once in a while. One thing that I think in particular Spider-Man writers don't understand is that if Peter wins more, that will make the failures and the hardships hit even harder. But if you constantly bash the character over the head with hardship after hardship, it completely takes away the point of the character learning anything in the first place. Another massive example of this in recent times is the breakup of Peter and MJ. Now, yes, I've beat this topic like a dead horse on the channel, so just bear with me, I'm gonna make this short and sweet. Peter and MJ's breakup meant nothing to the fans and carried no emotional weight to it. The only reason it was done was once again to spring another hardship onto the character and to keep him in this status quo type of role. So yes, Spider-Man is a character that suffers, and that will be built into the identity of the character for eternity. But does he have to suffer as much as he does? Absolutely not. Peter Parker should win. Peter Parker should have those highs, so the lows actually mean something. And that would mean the stories overall would be more impactful, more meaningful, and more enjoyable for the fans. And with that, I rest my case. Subscribe. Thanks for watching.